Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's Ryan Zomorodi, co-founder of realestateskills.com. And today we're going to be covering how to start investing in real estate for beginners. We've brought back a very special guest, Tim, who's an employee at one of our companies. And today he's going to be asking us everything about how to buy your first rental property from the very beginning. So if you're interested in learning more about how to buy your first rental property, just go to realestateskills.com/webinar, where we have a special training to take you through in much more detail. So we'll see you there. And Tim, so let's just kick it off today. I know you're very interested in buying your first rental property and really getting started in real estate investing. So what kind of questions do you have for me today?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure. Thank everyone. So Alex always tells me, keep the end in mind, right? And in real estate investing, obviously the end would be, how can I build passive income and secure generational wealth throughout my life so that my children, my grandchildren can be better off, better than me at least, And the reason why I'm here today is because rental properties is that end game that I have just no idea about. So my kind of confidence in the corporate system is lacking, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers feel the same way as well. I think there's a stat where it's like over 50% of millennials don't believe they'll have enough to retire by 65.
Yeah.
And I sometimes feel that way too. It's it's kind of a burden. Now that I'm in my 30s, it's like, okay, that is realistically right around the corner. The moves I make today will affect how I am in the future, for sure. So I guess my first question to you is, why do you think that the sentiment of this generation, I guess our generation, kind of feels like they've been let down by the system, and how did you kind of get out of it, and why did you think real estate was the best way to do it?
Yeah, phenomenal questions. It's true. It's the reality of today with, the last generation has kind of left things in much worse condition than, when they were, kind of building where we are today, with the money that's just being printed like crazy just to, solve problems and, give cheap debt. When there are big crises, it's just led to this mass inflation, and it's leaving a lot of people behind. I've said it a lot of times. I do feel like the gap between the rich and the poor is only getting bigger, and the haves and the have-nots. And, what's the big thing that kind of is the difference? It's a lot of times it's the ownership of assets, right? It's the accumulation of assets that grow in value over time. It's the people who are investing, the people who are in business, and then the people who don't are kind of on the other end of it. So I think it's just, once you kind of have that mental shift and really start to see you are, and, I'm glad you're asking these questions. It's if you want to be on the side of, the population that continues to grow and benefit from everything that has been going on with, the printing of money, with the inflation that we're seeing, just you have to start investing. And it's really, there's really no other way. You can start a business, that's relatively very challenging, and the likelihood of it being successful is a lot lower than if you invest in the right things, if you buy real estate, the way that we teach, the way that we know, the way that I've been doing it for over a decade now. It's a lot less risky, right? If you know what you're doing. So, the way that I saw this as a way out, because I was a broke student.
Yeah.
In college. I have been working since I was of legal age to work. Even before that, washing cars, for my parents, for their friends, just for adults, just doing anything I can to make a buck, and then working multiple jobs, throughout high school, throughout college, and just starting to just save away, and living, below my means. But I was always taught the traditional path of, go to school, get a degree, get a good job. That's what my parents did, and that's what they taught me. They came here, from Iran. They were immigrants and had that mindset of, get a job, focus on education first, right? Get the education, then you can get a job, and then you can maximize your income, working your way up a ladder. And that used to work. That used to be the plan, right? For most people, a lot of people were able to become wealthy and, well off just from doing that. But a lot of things have changed to where, companies don't, and most companies don't offer pensions. They don't have generous retirement plans. And it's just like, it's very hard to rely on that traditional model anymore,
Right.
just the way that things are going. Like, you have to diversify, you have to aggressively save and aggressively save to invest.
Pretty safe to say that a lot of people I've met in my life don't do that at all, you
Yeah.
know? And, real estate is always on the table for them where it's like, how do I kind of build what my parents have in this day and age? And I think, I'm glad you brought up inflation because I think the actual stat was like my dad, he was like so proud of me when I got my first 80K job, like in
Hmm.
the corporate world. But
Yeah.
now, because he was like, that took me years to get. But now that with inflation in mind, it's like I think that 80Ks actually are like 250K, which I super don't make, So it's like, what move do I make to kind of make up for that, And I've been kind of blessed with a digital marketing career, which is super nice, and I do side jobs, where I can for that, but that's only a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand if it's like a really really good month, so not enough,
Hmm.
it's not really enough. And like a really big driver for me also is like I'm trying to make kind of moves in my personal life where it's like me and my girlfriend right now, like we don't necessarily even know if we will ever be able to afford a house, like ever. That's not
Right.
even in the
Hmm.
wheelhouse of our mentality right now. And it like kind of pains me when I go home and she's like, do you ever think we'll like get like a property of our own?
Yeah.
And like the fact that I can't like firmly say yes is like a really, really, it's a pain,
For
for
sure.
sure that I
Yeah, you
feel.
feel it.
Yeah. And it's a pain that I know a lot of people will feel. My
Hmm.
sisters are very well off, but they don't want to work forever either. And even though they make, over six figures, both of them as couples, it's like, they even have this like weird feeling of like, I don't want to work till I'm 70, 80. And this is kind of the path that is like staring at me right now. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess my first question is, like why real estate versus like other investments before we get into it?
Hmm.
Like, have you invested in anything else besides real estate, and why do you think it trumps everything else?
Yeah, I think what drew me to real estate originally was that I could actually start my own business investing in real estate.
Hmm.
I'd always kind of had a business mindset. I always liked the idea of just like making money and like having my own money and like being able to decide what I did with it. And so, getting into real estate, like there's so many different options that you can decide what you like, what works for you, and there's ways to generate income as like your main profession and also invest for the long term. So I really liked that, and I didn't really necessarily think that I wanted to become like a stockbroker or an investment advisor, like
Hmm.
because you can make an income actively and then invest in those securities as well. But real estate was just something that I could relate to. I'd always lived in a house, and it just seemed to make sense the more I looked into it, having a tangible asset, being a housing provider,
Hmm.
and then being able to do really well with it. So I mean, I had some friends growing up that their families were in real estate, and I just like I didn't really know at the time, but like they were just very well off, and like I just didn't even understand that real
Right.
estate was a business. I just
Yeah.
thought, oh, there's houses and people live in it, and I
Yeah.
didn't really understand behind it. But when I was in the corporate world after college, I got a 60K a year job
Hmm.
right out of college, which I thought was like the holy grail.
Right.
But then I quickly found out that that wasn't the life I wanted to live. The skills that I needed to develop to become very good at that job, I didn't really see that translating to anything else in my life other
Hmm.
than that particular job or like similar jobs. So I started looking, and I loved the idea of starting my own real estate business because now I was in the driver's seat. I
Yeah.
could take control over, how much income I could make, and then ultimately reinvest in real estate. So I think, when it comes down to it, real estate is, in my opinion, the best way for the average person, the common person, to create wealth.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of different entry points, which is really fascinating. So you can, for example, you can get a loan and put as little as 5% down on a property, right? So the amount you really need to save, it, becomes actually achievable, and it can become a goal to start saving towards. So,
Hmm.
so for someone like yourself, or I'm sure a lot of people who are in our audience, you can start to see like, hey, how much do I really need to save at the end of the day to get into my first property?
Right.
And one of the first things I would suggest to do is just like, take a look at your personal finances, and you really need to get that in order to start investing. So, the main things to do is, maximize your income, but also decrease your expenses,
Hmm.
because they effectively do the same thing.
Right.
So you want to start saving as much as possible and, cutting unnecessary expenses so you can aggressively save. And when I started, it was like the game was to save. The game is like I'm getting fulfillment from saving and not spending money. So
Right.
that's a big mindset shift, because a lot of people, they are fulfilled when they're spending money. But I actually still to this day, it's like I hate spending money on
Right.
things that aren't going towards collecting assets and reaching financial freedom.
Hmm.
So I cringe sometimes at like unnecessary expenses, because I've just trained my mind over the past decade to just every dollar I'm saving is another step to financial future.
Right. You kind of like reverse like psychology to yourself where it's like
Exactly.
now I get like a kind of a rush where I have saved rather than,
Hmm.
get the extra steak on the side, like, you don't actually need that,
Yeah,
because that, those little building blocks could have been your first down payment. So
totally.
you want to tell me about, I guess, like how old you were when your first rental property was in your hands, like kind of the story of
Mhm.
like how that went about, like
Yeah,
how'd you find it, everything.
for sure. So I was 24 when I bought my first rental property, about 10 years ago. And it was, right around the time I left the corporate world. So, graduated from college, got a corporate job. And then, right around the time I was leaving was when I was like aggressively learning about real estate, and in particular rental real estate, and, all the models that go with that, and knew that it was a sure pathway to create wealth. So I was
Hmm.
like, I have to get into real estate no matter what. And so I ended up going to a lot of networking events, real estate investor association meetings, calling everybody I knew that had an interest in real estate, if they're an agent, investor, landlord, things like that. And eventually I got connected with a realtor team, and they were flipping properties. That they were managing properties, and they worked with investors. And so I ended up talking to them, and they not only flipped properties, but they also managed them, for investors. So I ended up buying my first rental through them,
Oh,
and
wow.
so they
Yeah.
just happened to be in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was in San Diego, California. And so I knew I made that decision to say, hey, I don't necessarily want to buy my first primary residence in San Diego, because
Mm-hmm.
that would have meant money out of my pocket every single month going to this property. So I bought something that actually cash flowed positively, several $100s a month, and made a decent return. So that
Hmm.
was like my first entrance into it. And so when I bought it, the purchase price was $155,000, which you can't buy anything in San
Right.
Diego
Yeah.
or most of Southern California for under $300,000. Something that's decent that you'd want to live in.
Hmm.
So that price point, it was a relatively newer build house in a suburb from Memphis, and 20 I put 20% down, because most investment properties, that's kind of what you need to put down, if unless you're going to live in it or something like
Right.
that. So
Hmm.
20% down was $31,000, plus you have to pay some closing costs. So I was all in around $35,000.
Right.
You
So
know,
you had $30,000 like pretty much saved up by the time that you were like, I'm gonna buy this property.
yeah.
S-
So I think I probably had like a little over 40,000 in my bank at that
mhm.
point. And that was like the bulk of all of my savings, which
Right.
was a huge deal. And it was very scary getting into that property.
Hmm.
But I knew that I would continue to go down the path of real estate, and I knew that I could generate more income, through flipping houses, through eventually wholesaling, through rehabbing,
Hmm.
and I would just go all in. So I just said, hey, I'm going to burn the boats. I'm going to kind of just go broke again, and start over with this property in hand.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to generate positive cash flow. So I think it's important to say at this time in my life too, I did really focus on, my personal income statement.
Hmm.
So one of the advice I like to give people is treat your life like a business. So you always want to look at your income every month and your expenses every month, and make sure that you have a positive cash flow in your life.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things I did around this time to decrease my expenses, because I wasn't making a lot of money at that time, but I would, just try to decrease my expenses as much as possible. So, for example, my living situation, right? Rent in San Diego is pretty high.
It's
It's
extremely
very
high.
high.
Yeah.
And most people spend, 50% or more of their income on rent.
Yeah.
So what I did around that time is I leased a 4-bedroom, 3-bath apartment, and then I subleased 3 of the rooms in that apartment to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my total rent was about $3,400 a month. And then I subleased 3 rooms for $1,200 each.
Oh, okay.
So I
Yeah.
ended up, after utilities and everything, I was paying about $100 to $200 a month for almost 4 years.
Right.
So during that time, instead of paying, $1,200 a month for a room, I was paying about $100 to $200, and I ended up saving, if you think about it, probably about $30, $40, $50,000
Yeah.
in rent that I wasn't paying.
That's awesome.
So it's basically, if you think about it, I would have had to make, $80,000, and then after taxes, that's $40,000, $50,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, my point is, every dollar you save, and if you can decrease your lifestyle expenses, it's basically like making more money.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy, society tells us to spend more money, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the commercials, all the, temptations that are out there, the social media, people flexing,
Yeah.
watching people go on vacation. It's easy to spend a lot of money, right? Everyone tells you to spend money. So you have to kind of shift your mindset and be like, hey, I'm only going to spend money on things that are, really survival, right? Like
Yeah.
lower your rent costs as much as possible. Don't spend anything that's really unnecessary, right? Don't go out all the time to eat. And then, just invest in the things that are going to make a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Invest in your education, invest in books, invest in, your health, things like that. But there's a lot of, if everyone really takes a close look at their lifestyle, then there's probably things you could cut out
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
and increase your saving rate.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up the subleasing to for other people and then kind of paying for the
Mhm.
rent yourself, because in my mind, in a lot of people's minds that I know, it's like, okay, if I'm gonna cut out one of the biggest expenses I have in California, is rent is obviously one of them.
Yeah.
A lot of people have the option of like, oh, I just need to, move back home. And I've seen this several times. I've seen like my bosses being like, I have to move back home with my parents for like a year.
Yeah.
Just so I don't have to pay rent and then pay for XYZ, because that's what I need in my life. But a lot of people don't have that option. A lot of people don't have, kind of cushion like that,
Mhm.
a blessing like that to fall back on, which, that's the option that they would have, where it's like, okay, well, then I will sublease to all these people instead. Obviously, a little bit more work, to do that. But,
Yeah,
I'm
it is.
glad you brought that up, because I didn't even think about that. It's a great, like, kind of way to mitigate all of your expenses, which is really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easier said than done. So
Yeah.
there's definitely,
Yeah.
some things that can go wrong with that, but made it work. And, it definitely helped me save a lot more and get into a position to, buy that first rental property.
Yeah, to kind of pivot, but a lot of people say they can't save because of things like student loans, other debts that they're in. What advice do you have for someone in that situation where it's just like it might seem super impossible to save money at all because
Mhm.
of how much debt they do have? I know somebody who just got a medical degree, and
Mhm.
they have now hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and he had actually had to get a side job as a waiter as well after this med school stuff.
Wow.
So it's like, he did all this work, he has his scrubs on, and then he immediately takes the scrubs off and goes to serve in a restaurant. So I guess what advice do you have for people in that situation?
Yeah, I think it just depends on your skill set at that point, right? If you can get a job that will, increase your income, then, you do want to just find ways to increase your income.
Mhm.
If you don't have a skill set yet, there's plenty of ways where you can increase your income, through skills that you can learn and ultimately monetize those. Some of the things we teach here at Real Estate Skills, like wholesaling,
Mhm.
is a great way to potentially make a lot of money very quickly
Right.
if you know what to do, if you follow a blueprint. And house flipping, right? Like these are skills that do take time to learn, but there are a lot of resources out there, especially today in the information age, where
Yeah.
you can learn things online, on your laptop. through books, through programs. There's really no excuse to learn skills that you can ultimately monetize and, help aggressively pay off that debt.
Right.
So, anyone who's in that position, I would just say like, hey, if you don't have a budget, right? If you don't have a personal budget, go ahead and make one. That's a great place to start
Right.
so that you can understand how you can, more responsibly pay that off and really manage that debt on a regular basis. If you're in that position and you're going out and you're, buying, expensive drinks
Yeah.
and going on vacation and, buying expensive shoes and clothes, like you really don't need to do that,
Yeah.
and just cut that out. Like just, take, just check the ego at the door and just, go to Costco and buy some
Yeah.
clothes, just buy cheap clothes, like, and, wear that for a while. Like it's okay. It's not a big deal. Learn how to cook, like, buy some rice and beans and, just don't spend unnecessarily.
Right.
Is a good place to start. So if you can start there, get your budget in order, and then, just understand where that money is going if you're producing any. And if you don't have a job, you can definitely get one, or, get into business for yourself, learn a skill set, and then you can grow your own business at the same time to aggressively pay off that debt. If you can get into some investments as well eventually that can produce a higher return than what you're paying on that debt, then you might consider, going that route as well. So I think it just kind of depends on where you're at,
Right.
on the situation and what resources, what skill sets you have.
Yeah, I'm glad you
Available.
brought up the. I mean, obviously, I'm learning wholesaling, from you
Yeah.
and Alex as
Mhm.
well. But what I found is if rental properties, or I guess gaining passive income through rental properties is your end game, then what better to like kind of master real estate by starting with that skill first? Because that a lot of the things that I've found that learning there kind of apply to house flipping, and then I'm sure it'll
Mhm.
apply to rentals as well. So if that is kind of where you're going to go, why not have the wholesaling be the starting point for it? So,
Mhm.
um, let's say, it's maybe a year or two from now, I have the capital through whatever means that you just mentioned before. How do I go about, I guess, finding and purchasing my first rental?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that. I would say, you want to save the money that you've made, and put that towards the property. So, we prefer and we like and we advocate for ways to find properties that don't require, spending thousands of dollars on marketing
Mm-hmm.
and sending postcards and, sending mailers and things like that, because you could burn through that down payment money very quickly. So we always advocate, work with the real estate agent, look at,
Mm-hmm.
go on the MLS, the multiple listing service, go on Zillow, Redfin. You can find deals there. Deals are hitting the market, every single day if you know what to look for. And, if you get educated, you don't necessarily have to work with an agent to find the deals, but we always like to work with agents who are listing these properties and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately have relationships with sellers. They're out there doing marketing to find sellers who are ready to sell their houses. So if we're able to tap into that, then we can, get deals sent to us. But the most important thing is you want to know how to identify a good deal.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, agents are going to send you properties that hit the market without analyzing them. A lot of agents don't know the investing side of things. So we always like to empower individual investors like yourself, like anyone who's looking to buy their first rental property or their next rental property, and ultimately know how to evaluate a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because a property can be a great investment at the right price, but it can also be a horrible investment at the wrong price. So if you know how to evaluate the deals, like we can get into, but if you know how to figure out cash flow, how to understand your return on investment, then you can start to look at properties differently and ultimately know what to offer, what price is going to be good for you and produce adequate cash flow.
Yeah, and
Just
you can mention that in your first property, right? Where you
yeah.
had the numbers first,
Hmm.
and you were like, "This is the surefire. This is going to make me money, and I have to
Hmm.
do it right now." Kind of a thing.
Totally. Yeah. I looked at, a lot of properties before I bought that first one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just about you have to think like an investor first. You have to know the investment model that you're going after. So, buy and hold real estate is all about cash flow and it's all about equity growth.
Mm-hmm.
So those are really like the two main ways that you make money.
Yeah.
So if you have to understand how a property produces cash flow, and then once you start looking at deals, you start analyzing a lot of deals. Ultimately, you're going to say, "Hey, this is a great deal,"
Hmm.
and put yourself in a position to move on that quickly.
Right. Right. So I'm very new. So forgive this question, but I'm not exactly sure one how mortgages really work
Hmm.
personally. I know that's like the first stepping stone into like actually, buying a property. I remember you mentioning you did the 30 or 20% down on uh your property. So, um how do they work? How does someone like me, let's just say I have 30,000 in the bank right now, like how does that process kind of work for me to purchase a property that was going to get me cash flow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to just start learning about it, to get involved with getting a loan, is talking to a mortgage broker or just a traditional mortgage lender. So I say mortgage broker because these are individuals who can work with a client like yourself, and then they'll shop around and find the best loan product that's available today. And so they'll take a look at your financial position. They'll probably ask for any pay stubs, any proof of income, any tax returns that you
Hmm.
might have. They'll look at your assets. They'll pull your credit. So they'll go through a application process with you, and ultimately tell you, are you going to be able to qualify for a loan or not? And if you are, they'll be able to tell you, what are your options, what different types of
Mm-hmm.
loans you can get, how much you can actually borrow, and then if you don't qualify yet, then they'll be able to tell you what do you need to do to ultimately be able to get a loan. Is
Right.
that, fix your credit? Is that, work on your debt to income ratio, which is basically the amount of debt that you have in relation to how much income that you're producing.
Hmm.
So they'll help you come up with a path to ultimately qualify for a loan. So I think that's a good first step, is just start talking to lenders, start talking to multiple lenders, and then they can actually just set you up for understanding where you are on your journey. And in short, the way loans work is you'll bring a property to the table, and a lender will get an appraisal on that property. Once you're pre-qualified, of course.
Yeah.
Once they make sure that you have enough satisfactory credit, you have enough income, your whole borrower profile checks out. Then they'll look at the property and they'll get it appraised. So they'll send a professional out there to determine how much the value of that property is, and then they'll lend up to a certain amount of that value. So when you say, I'm going to put 20% down, then that means the lender is putting up 80% loan to value on the purchase price of that property, or the market value of that property. So usually you want to extend your loan as far out as possible. So I think a 30-year fixed rate is
Hmm.
really kind of the standard,
Pretty
but
common, right?
it's very
Yeah.
common. So the loan is amortized, meaning it gets paid off over 30 years, and a portion of each payment goes to pay off that balance of the loan.
Hmm.
But usually a bigger chunk of that payment is going to pay the interest on that loan. So that's the lender's profit. And then, but a chunk of that is going to pay down the balance. So over that 30 years, eventually it gets completely paid off.
Mm-hmm.
But most people end up refinancing the property or selling the property before it's completely paid off.
Right. Hmm.
So it's less common that someone actually goes that full 30 years. Usually, I think they say between 5 and 7 years is when people typically refinance or sell the property.
Right. Hmm. After they sell it, obviously the new owner just takes over. Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Once you sell the property, ideally you're selling it for more than you bought it.
Yeah.
So those proceeds go to pay off the lender, and then whatever's left goes back to the seller of the
Hmm.
property.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So a lot of options for sure. And I guess that's why step one is so important because, these lenders will look at all of those numbers
Hmm.
that you basically your entire life, all your decisions in your life. And it's like, okay, like here's what they deserve. And like, hopefully everybody's been good. And then like you get, the best loan rates that you can. But yeah, I guess, yeah, that's why step one, hits hard for sure, getting the
Yeah.
finances order. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's ways to get qualified if you're self-employed. If you have your own business,
Hmm.
if you don't have a typical job, right? You're receiving a W-2, but if you do have a job, then usually it's a lot easier to get loans. So I think for yourself, for a lot of people in our audience, if you do have a job, like you can use that to your advantage because you can get qualified for a lot easier on these different types of investment properties, different types of loans. So
Mhm.
lenders love W-2 income. They love pay stubs. It's a little bit harder if you're self-employed, but
Mhm.
there are lenders that do specialize in self-employed types of loans. So
Mhm.
so it's very tough to get a loan if you're not making any money. You need to have
Right.
some
Mhm.
income. You need to have a history of income. So I know it's tempting, like for small business owners, to deduct everything as possible and show zero income. And like it's cool because you're not paying any taxes on the income you're making, but at the same time you're not going to be able to borrow anything because
Right.
a lender's going to look at it and say, great, well, maybe you made $200,000 in your business, but you also spent
Yeah.
$250,000, so
Yeah.
you're net loss. So you're actually not making money.
Right.
So
Mhm.
so the W-2s are nice because it's actual net income to you as an employee,
Yeah.
which they can use to ultimately qualify you for a loan. So
Yeah, I
so
didn't even think about that. That's great.
yeah, yeah.
So, say I'm approved, I have the funding, I'm ready to go. Let's just say you when you were 24. Um, I guess what property do you think I should look for? Immediately when someone says rental property to me, I'm like, oh, apartment building,
Mhm,
that's just shoot for the sky or something like that. But obviously you went with a single family home.
mhm.
Why was that your choice? What do you believe that was the best choice to make as well?
Yeah, I think single family homes are an amazing place to start. There's a lot of benefits in buying your first rental property that is a single family home.
Hmm.
The first of which is that it's just very relatable. They're very in demand, so there's a lot more people who'd rather live in a single family home than an apartment.
Right.
Because you have a yard, you have independence, you don't share walls with other people. So they're generally more desirable than an apartment. There's also better financing for single family
Mm,
houses compared to an apartment. So if you're buying a duplex, triplex, quadplex for your first rental property, lenders are typically going to want to see 25% down at a minimum.
hmm.
And especially if it's an investment property. So you're going to have to come up with more cash out of pocket, which just is going to require you to save more. And whereas a single family property, you can get away with 20% down.
Hmm.
So that alone is a nice benefit. Also, with a single family, you can generally transfer all the utilities responsibility to the tenant, also
Mm,
the landscaping, and a lot of the maintenance and ongoing expenses with a property. It's much more easy to transfer it on to the tenant. So they'll even put the utilities in their name a lot of the time. So
mm.
just some simplicity. A lot of the multifamily properties that I've looked at that I own, they don't have separate meters for each unit. So it gets sometimes complicated on how to actually bill back tenants for utilities.
Right.
So just little things like that, common area maintenance, like who's responsible for that.
Hmm.
So it can be a little bit more complicated from that aspect. But I mean, I still do think, 2 to 4 units are a great investment for your
Hmm.
first time. But a single family property, it's easier. It's a great first investment. There's
Yeah.
one lease, one tenant,
Hmm.
one stream of income coming in, one mortgage, and it's just very relatable.
Yeah.
The other aspect too that I think people overlook is that there's a lot more buyers for single family properties. So let's say you want to sell it after 3 to 5 years, maybe the property value's doubled and you're ready to cash out on that equity. There's a lot more buyers for single family properties.
Hmm.
There's owner occupants, people who want to live in it and actually stay in there. And so as a result, the appreciation actually happens quicker on single family properties if you're buying in the right area, the right neighborhood where there's a lot of owner occupants living there, people who are starting families or, just living there on a longer term basis.
Hmm.
There's more pride of ownership in those types of neighborhoods. So values do tend to go up faster, and you'll be able to ultimately get a better return from an appreciation standpoint
Hmm.
on a single family house in a good neighborhood as opposed to a multifamily property, right? An apartment complex.
Yeah.
And typically, multifamily properties are in kind of lower end areas as opposed to single family properties,
Hmm.
right? There's just
Yeah.
more pride of ownership. They're more sought after. And so, versus like a more rental area where there's
Hmm.
like multifamily units and more density.
Right.
So it's a little bit more of a premium area. So that's why I got into single family, just less down payment, more relatable, more options, more potential for appreciation.
Yeah. And then the location of it was like obviously very important to you as well. By
Mhm.
just saying you really want a single family in a high desired area. That's like the bread and butter of like, yeah, that's really really good, rather than
Mhm.
somewhere where the brand might be less, maybe a little dangerous, kind of a higher risk venture. So that sweet spot of a nice location and the single family property type does make sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, honestly, when you have multiple tenants on the same property, there's more potential drama, there's more potential
Right.
disputes,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
I've bought properties where there's, very questionable tenants doing illegal things on the property, and so it just takes a while to kinda turn over, and there's more problems with neighbors as a result of that, so
Mm-hmm.
there's just a little bit more that can happen, a little bit more headache possibility with multifamily properties, not
Right.
to say they can't be great investments because they are, but, the single family, again, for your first rental property, your very first real estate investment, it's just safer. It's just one unit, and it's a stepping stone to your next one.
Yeah. Just because I'm curious, how many doors do you own today?
I have interest in close to 200 right now,
Wow.
but me
Yeah.
personally, I've got a couple dozen doors.
Yeah.
That's just, me that I own outright.
Yeah. How many I guess single family homes before it was like I'm gonna venture off into like this office or this apartment complex, like how
Yeah.
many single family homes did you have before then?
I bought 3 single
Oh,
families
nice. Yeah.
before I bought a multifamily property.
Yeah.
So I bought 3 and then I bought a triplex, and it was like a distressed triplex, and it was a long story on that one, but ended up being a great deal, but
Hmm.
needed a lot of work. So that the first 3 single families, they were like rent ready, pretty much turnkey, and it was, managed by a third party. And then once I got that confidence, I was like, hey, I can do anything now.
Right. Yeah.
So I bought, big fixer triplex, and that was my first dabble into multifamily. It was
Hmm.
like a foreclosed, kind of like a Burr strategy property where I'd rehab the whole thing, and the plan was just to rent it out and refinance.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so that was, when I started buying multifamilies, was like on the fourth deal.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess I'm curious as to what kind of price range I should be looking for. Like I know you mentioned 155 on your first one. Is that right? 155,000.
Yeah.
So say, am I kind of looking for that same range? Should I, maybe go for a little less on my first one, a little more? Was that like the perfect sweet spot you think for you, or maybe, should be adjusted a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a good sweet spot. However, that was about 10 years ago. So
Right.
that same property today is worth double that. So it's
Yeah.
probably worth like 310,000, 320,000.
Hmm.
So I think if you can buy something, so the rough numbers on that one, it was a $155,000 purchase. It rented for $1,350 a month. So it was almost that 1% rule, but not quite.
Hmm.
But I knew the cash flow was like a little less because it was in a nicer area. It was, had a lot more potential for appreciation. So I kind of had that trade off.
Hmm.
But it really boils down to the numbers. So, first off, it's like, what can you afford as far as your pre-qualification? So when you talk to a lender, you'll understand what price point you can really get into.
Right. Hmm.
And then it's all about the down payment.
Yeah.
So if you kind of want to go as big as you can ultimately afford, and you have to get to know your market too. So for me, it's less about like the price point sweet spot and more like what makes sense for the market.
Hmm.
So you generally want to buy something like in the median price point for a market, maybe even a little bit lower. So it's still kind of considered affordable housing,
Hmm.
because right now we're in kind of an affordable housing shortage. So if you can buy like relatively affordable for an area,
Yeah.
then that is generally going to be very high in demand.
Hmm.
So it really boils down to the numbers,
Yeah.
at the end of the day. What can you afford, and then what's ultimately going to cash flow?
Yeah. Would you I guess recommend buying a property where you plan on having tenants for like long term, say like, a year, rather than buying like a nice vacation home where you kind of just have it for people there for the weekend, right?
Hmm.
Which elephant in the room, at least for me, it's like when I think rental property too, Airbnb comes to mind, Verbo comes to mind, buy this sick house on the beach and rent it out when like, people are on vacation. Like that's,
Hmm.
before obviously, meeting you, that was the mindset I had about that. So, I mean, Obviously, I don't know the numbers, but would you generally think it's safer to do that long term, or is it about the same? Like, because if you buy it in a good area, people are coming consistently. So it's like, you're making the same amount of money.
Yeah, short-term rentals, Airbnb, VRBO, they have their own set of risks.
Mm,
So there's a lot of cities that are banning short-term rentals, or they're just making it very difficult to do that consistently. There's a lot of restrictions around that, permits involved. I would say if you're going to get into a property that has short-term rental potential, you still want to make sure it can cash flow as a long-term rental. Because if something happens where either it gets banned, or let's say there's hotels that pop up and now, there's not as much demand for that property, then you just want to make sure you have a backup plan. So, um, I see a lot of, people getting into these short-term rentals, and they're making, they're barely breaking even, or maybe some cash flow as a short-term rental.
right.
So it should be like that for a long-term rental, and if you short-term rent it, it should be, significantly higher cash flow.
Hmm.
So I've always, stuck to long-term rentals because that's just the most consistent. It's the safest. It's the age-old strategy that just still works
Hmm.
today, and it's just less less headaches, less management involved. It's much more passive. Short-term rentals are truly an active business.
Hmm.
It is like running a business because you have people going in and out, every few days. You have cleaning crews in there all the time. You have maintenance, repairs, and people just expect a much higher quality of an experience when they're renting short term.
Right. Hmm.
So it is just more of an active strategy. So it can be great, for someone who's looking to get into real estate and just kind of make an active income. But yeah, I stick with long term rentals for the most part, just because it's something that can, I see it as it's very scalable, and I can just add more units, leave it with the property management company, and then kind of just set it and forget it and let
Hmm.
time do its thing.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a different set of risks involved with that,
Hmm.
but as long as it can work as a long-term rental, then the short-term rental, in my opinion, is just icing on the cake. Is just like the big upside.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, say I plan on doing the long-term rental single family. Um, you know me, I'm a step-by-step guy. So, analyzing if it's good or not is
Mhm.
where is the big hump where I'm at right now. I don't really know where to start to actually know if it's good. What numbers are like the most important? What should I be looking out for? Can you give me an example with like
Mhm.
kind of nice round numbers?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So when I started out on this journey of investing in real estate, buying rental properties, I got really good at the numbers. And I think, like, for me, I've always considered myself, eventually like an acquisitions specialist, just because of how many deals I've looked at, how many numbers I've crunched.
Hmm.
So I have multiple spreadsheets that were hand built of how do I analyze a rental property. And I have hundreds, if not thousands, of rows on this spreadsheet of just different properties that I've looked at and like analyzed the numbers. So if there's one skill to get really good at when you're buying your first rental property, it's just knowing the numbers, knowing how to analyze it. So happy to go through it right now and
Yeah.
just kind of share those numbers, and even kind of like help anyone listening like build their own spreadsheet, or even reach out to us if you want one of our spreadsheets. And we obviously be happy to share that with the audience. But ultimately, I look at a few things, and the first off is a purchase price,
Hmm.
right? So you can start with the asking price on a property. So if you're looking at a listing on the MLS, or if you have an off-market deal, you're talking to someone who's selling the property. You don't want to start with kind of a base price. So that's kind of where it all starts. That's the total amount of cash to buy the property. You're gonna have some closing costs, maybe 1 to 2% of that purchase price as well.
Hmm.
Most people aren't buying with all cash. So, we're always buying with financing. We get debt, we get long term fixed rate debt, and then we put 20% down. If it's a multifamily property, 25% down. So, so I'd put the purchase price down, and then I'd figure out the down payment. So I would just multiply the purchase price by 20%.
Hmm.
And then that tells me how much down do I need on that property. From there, I would just subtract that down payment from the purchase price to get to how much is the loan amount that I'm looking to get. So if I put 20% down, I need an 80% loan to value loan. So let's just run some quick numbers. Let's say it's $100,000 purchase price. 20% down is
$20,000.
$20,000. Okay.
Don't throw the math at
Good.
me.
All right.
You know
At
me.
least we covered the basics there. We're on a good start.
Yeah.
And then the loan balance, the loan amount we're trying to get is $80,000. Okay. So once we have that, now we can go and look at a mortgage calculator. So we can determine how much is the mortgage payment going to be. So there's lots of different mortgage calculators online. I suggest everyone, including yourself, Tim, like look at a mortgage calculator. I always use bankrate.com. Like I think one of the first realtors I worked with showed me that website, and I've just been using it ever since, but they're all the same. So any mortgage calculator you use is going to give you the exact same numbers with the same inputs. So it doesn't really matter which one you use, but you would then plug in your purchase price, your down payment, and then your interest rate into a mortgage calculator, and that'll tell you what your mortgage payment is going to be. So the mortgage payment consists of your principal payment and your interest. So the principal is the amount of the mortgage payment that's paying down your loan, and then the interest is that lender's profit, like we talked about before. So it'll break that down for you, but ultimately you're just looking for the aggregate of those two numbers. So that's your P&I payment, your principal and interest payment. So then I would plug that into the spreadsheet as well, and so that's one of your biggest, if not your biggest expense in owning that property is paying down that mortgage.
Right.
So in addition, you have property insurance. So you want to get, fire insurance, dwelling insurance, and that's going to run you, on a property like that, anywhere from, $60 to $100 a month for that. And so why don't we just run actual numbers real quick so we can just kind of, for anyone who's following along. So if we had $100,000 purchase price, 20% down, let's just say we're getting a 6.5% interest rate. So our principal and interest payment would be around $505,000. And again, that's your biggest payment. Let's say our insurance is like $60 a month. Then you have your property taxes. Okay, so there's many ways you can figure that out. You can look online. There's some property tax estimator websites. You can also just Google the tax rate for where the property is. And usually properties get assessed. They get reassessed when you buy them. It's different in every county and municipality, but you have your property tax payment, which you can figure out how much that is. And so that might be, $120 a month, let's just say. And so those are like your four big payments. And usually when you get a mortgage, you have the option to have the lender make those payments for you. So they call it an escrow account. So, the lender wants to make sure you're paying your insurance and your taxes. Right. So these are the, payments that you absolutely have to make. So a lot of times you'll lump them all into one and just make one big payment to the lender. And then they actually will pay your insurance, and then they'll pay your taxes as they come due. So I usually opt for that just because it just helps me, manage cash flow. It helps me not have to remember, every year to pay my insurance. Taxes are usually due twice a year, so they just automatically do that. So kind of just out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, that's great.
So you kind of all lump that together, and then you're going to have your property vacant at some point during the year, right? You can't just assume that it's always going to be rented 100% of the time. So you want to just determine what percent of the year it's going to be vacant. So I usually recommend anywhere from like 4% to 8% of the gross rent you think you're going to collect is going to be lost to vacancy, because people move, they'll move out. And so you're going to need like a couple weeks probably to turn the unit over.
Right.
So this can vary depending on your market. And so I'll usually just plug in, basically a percentage of the gross rent, whatever that rent might be is going to be going to vacancy. You're also going to have property management. So if you're going to have third-party property management handle the day-to-day of the leasing, the repairs, the turnovers, then you're going to want to budget for property management. So I usually don't recommend, first-time investors manage their own properties unless they have experience with management and, all of that stuff.
Right.
So most people don't. So it's kind of a low margin or like low paying kind of role as a property manager. So I always recommend just hiring it out.
Hmm.
So it allows you to focus on making more income, just increasing your income abilities and then buying, that next property.
Yeah.
So
Less stress too, I imagine.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like compliance that goes with management, rent control laws,
Hmm.
notices that you have to send tenants at certain times. So there is a lot that goes into managing a property. So usually they charge around 8 to 10% of the gross rent collected. So then I would just, multiply whatever your rent is by 8 to 10%,
Hmm.
and then that will, come up with your management cost.
Yeah.
So then I would just, build that into the spreadsheet as well. So you might have, 8% for vacancy, another 8% for management. And then you're also going to have maintenance costs,
Hmm.
because as you own a property, things come up that you as the landlord are responsible to pay for, right? So now you're a property owner. So you have to pay for, certain things like, potentially mowing the lawn,
Hmm.
roof leaks, if a storm comes through and, a fence falls over, if some of the siding of the property falls down, these are the things that you're going to want to take care of,
Right.
to maintain that property, to make sure it's producing high rents, and ultimately to keep your tenants happy
Hmm.
so that they do continue staying there and keep paying your rent.
Yeah.
So depending on the condition of the property you're buying, you're going to just kind of allocate a certain amount of your rent as a maintenance reserve. So you want to go into a property with the expectation that you're going to be paying money in maintenance on a regular basis.
Right.
So I budget, for like newer construction, brand new properties, maybe 5% of that gross rent is going to be going towards a maintenance budget. If it's an older property, right? I own properties that are over 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so I'll budget anywhere from 10 to 20%,
Yeah.
just depending again on the condition. Again, 10 to 20% of the gross rent, just saying I'm basically expecting to pay that in maintenance costs.
Hmm.
So that you'll build in. And then you can also allocate an additional budget for capital expenditures. So what are CapEx? CapEx for short. What are capital expenditures? It's like basically just budgeting for a new roof one day, budgeting for
Mm-hmm.
water heaters that go out,
Yeah.
just some of the bigger ticket items at a property that aren't essential to the operations on a regular basis. But these are just the main systems of the house that do degrade over time that eventually, you're going to have to pay for if you still own the property. So it's just kind of, these are just ways to say that I'm building reserves one day when this does happen, when this expense happens.
Hmm.
So, so those are things that you can kind of play with depending on the property and like different allocations. So it's really up to you as the investor how conservative you want to be, or just how aggressive you want to be.
Right.
And it's good to have best and worst case scenarios when you're running your numbers.
Hmm. Can you rent out a property like basically the day that you buy it and it's under your name for yourself, or do you have to wait a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. You can buy it with a tenant in place.
Hmm.
So the day that you close on it, you're now collecting income.
Oh wow, yeah. So,
I've had situations where, I close on a property and then while we're in escrow before I own the property, we're already advertising, we're already leasing, we're already showing the property on my behalf.
mhm.
And then we have a tenant in there paying rent 4 days after closing.
Yeah,
So that's ideal because if you're not collecting rent, you're losing money every month.
yeah.
So
Was there ever a property that you bought where you were like, wow, this is very unprofitable. Why'd I do this? And you just had to sell it. And how did that kind of come up? Was there a little bit of lack of foresight on your part, and now you want it, like, you like want to like warn new investors like me, like, hey, make sure that that doesn't happen to you, kind of a thing.
yeah, the only time I've lost money on real estate was more like speculative plays, like if I
Mm,
was flipping a property. So I've done a lot of fix and flips,
yeah,
and the only time I've lost money was on fix and flips where we didn't have a strategy to buy and hold the property. It was
right,
more of a
okay,
short term,
yeah,
hey, let's get in, let's buy this distressed property. We have a plan to add value and then ultimately sell it to someone else.
hmm,
And so I've lost, considerable money on two specific deals, and that was all with a short term plan. We
right,
didn't plan to
hmm,
rent it out. So
right,
with rentals, fortunately, it's a lot easier to make money because you have a long term horizon.
yeah,
Even if you're maybe losing money in the short term, I like to say time heals all wounds in real estate. And so the person who can hold the property the longest is ultimately going to win.
Wow. Okay.
So
Yeah.
a lot of flippers, you're buying property on short-term debt that's high interest, or maybe you're borrowing money that you're paying, 10, 14 plus percent interest every year on it.
Right.
So if let's just say you're borrowing $1 million at 14%, that's $140,000 a year in interest you're paying every single year.
Yeah.
So if you're unable to sell it at enough of a profit after your rehab budget, then you could lose money and you're going to have to, come out of pocket basically, or just lose your down payment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, that's why I guess this analyzing step is just so important, because, long term, how much can this make me? And if for sure it can, at least at the very least, it's like it'll make me something, maybe not exactly, but a lot, would you say, like less riskier than what if this flip goes wrong? And, because that long term strategy has to be in mind, I think,
100%.
to kind of excel.
For sure. Yeah. So let's finish with this kind of spreadsheet model, because I think it paints the picture of how you can get into one of these investments, knowing that you're going to win and knowing you don't have to sell. So again, we covered, the down payment, the mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, budgeting for vacancy maintenance and management, and also capital expenditures if it's something that, you want to include in your model. There might be things like utilities. Again, if you're buying a multifamily property, you might be covering utilities. There might be an HOA. So I own properties in HOAs where you're paying, monthly or quarterly just to the homeowners association. And then sometimes you might want to bake in like a leasing fee as well. So if you're doing property management, sometimes they might charge additional leasing fees, which you might just want to kind of factor into your annual numbers to really get to your true net number. So once you have all those expenses, I just basically add those up. So you figure out what's my total monthly expense just to own this property, and conservatively budgeting for these different expense categories. And then that gives you one number. And then your goal at this point is to make sure the property produces enough rent to more than cover that monthly expense.
Right.
So let's just say all that added up to about $1,200 a month. Then if you can rent your property for $1,500 a month, then that means you're at the end of the month, you're producing $300 in net cash flow. Right. That's what we call cash flow. Because if you're collecting $1,500 in rent, after you're paying all those expenses and after you're budgeting for potential expenses in the future, that's left over, that's cash flow. So that's really your true net number. And so I'll multiply that by 12 to get to the annual cash flow. And then once you have that annual cash flow number, you can divide that by your total investment in on the deal to come up with your cash on cash return. So, let's say $300 a month in 12 months, that's $3,600, right? $3,600 in annual cash flow. That sounds great. Who wouldn't love to have that? But what if you had to put up $1 million cash to receive that?
Right.
Yeah. That would be a horrible return. So it's all about how much cash flow in relation to the investment you put in on that deal. Like how much cash should I have to put up to receive that cash flow? So that's what cash on cash return is all about. So that's ultimately what my calculator is solving for, is how much cash flow am I producing, and then how much cash flow in relation to the down payment and closing costs.
Right.
So I would take the annual cash flow, divide it by the down payment plus closing costs. So that's like my total capital invested. So when I was starting out, I was looking for 7% cash on cash return or more. And so depending on what market you're in, that's still achievable today. There are markets that, we look at that our students are buying in that are, producing 7%, 10% plus cash on cash returns.
Yeah.
And so, but there are markets, right? Southern California, for example, where it's extremely difficult to even get any positive cash flow because the prices are so much higher in relation to what these properties rent for, that you're probably going to be negative initially, like negative cash on cash returns. So you're actually losing money every year.
Right.
So once you look at these numbers and you understand how to calculate cash flow and then your cash on cash return, it's a great starting point to really know how to analyze rental properties and ultimately know when you buy your first rental property that you're getting a good deal, that you can have it pay for itself, because like cash flow is great, but in my opinion, cash flow is really there to help you afford to keep the property long term.
Right.
Because the most of my earnings in real estate, the bulk of my net worth has been in appreciation of properties, has been the forced appreciation of properties where they go up in value. Right. The first property I bought, $155,000. I put $35,000 down. It's worth over $300,000 now. So that $35,000 is worth over $200,000 now. And that doesn't even factor in the cash flow it's been producing, 10% every year, which is, over $3,000 a year in net cash flow.
Yeah.
Now it's closer to, $10,000 of net cash flow every year. So I'm basically getting that, a third of that investment back every single year in just cash flow. So I haven't sold that property yet. I just have that equity sitting there.
Yeah.
So eventually I'll be able to sell it and exchange it into something bigger and better. Or, if rates ever improve, then I'll be able to do a cash out refinance and tap into that equity and buy something else.
Right.
So there are a ton of ways to actually analyze a rental property to make sure it's a good investment, to square it up and compare apples to apples with other investments. But, for your first investment, at least from my perspective, this is like the best way to analyze a rental property to make sure it's going to cash flow and produce a return for you.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up kind of, trying to do it in California thing, because immediately I'm like, okay, well, the housing market here has been known to be kind of terrible, especially places in San Diego where everything's so expensive. So for my first one, like yours was out of state, right? So I guess, would you recommend me do the same thing? Are there areas in California that you would actually do for your first rental property?
So I would say for someone like yourself, I wouldn't completely stray away from buying in California.
As long as the numbers are good.
I think, there are challenges in California for sure,
Yeah.
Particularly landlord tenant laws and just like very restrictive laws that make it difficult for landlords to operate, like things that just change every year that you're just supposed to know, that make it challenging. But I would say some of my best deals have been in California because they've appreciated significantly.
Right.
The rents have grown faster than anywhere else in the country, and they cash flow like crazy. Like, every property, thousands of dollars a month in just net cash flow. However, for your first deal, I would say to get into a property, you could consider buying something that you're going to live in for a short term and then move out and turn it into a complete rental. So I would consider doing that, what they call a house hack, where you buy a property that you live in. Maybe it has multiple bedrooms, maybe it's a duplex or a fourplex that you can get in with 5% down. And, you might be breaking even or maybe even a little bit negative at the end of the day. But if you can rent out a portion of that property, let's say you buy a 5-bedroom house and you rent 3 or 4 bedrooms in that house to tenants that you can hand pick, that you can at least tolerate to live in, then that can at least help you pay the mortgage. So maybe you're still paying the same amount that you are now in rent, but now you're building equity in a house that you own, a property that you own.
Right.
So you get the benefit of appreciation.
Yeah.
So I like to think of it this way. If you buy a property with 5% down and that property goes up in value by 5%, you've effectively doubled your money.
Right.
And that might happen in 12 months or 24 months. And where are you going to get a 50 to 100% return on your money anywhere else?
I can't really think of one.
So it's really interesting when you think of it that way. But of course, it does obviously take some sacrifice. Your partner obviously has to be okay with either sharing a home with other people or even sharing the property itself. Maybe a little bit easier if you can have separate units on that property, and maybe even they're detached cottages on the same property. So it kind of feels like a single family property, but you're still renting it out to other parties, and they're effectively helping you pay down that mortgage and keep that property.
Yeah.
So now you can get in with a lower down payment. And then eventually after 6 months to a year, then maybe you can move out and turn it into 100% a rental. Maybe you wait till the rents go up to where it is cash flowing.
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably a really good strategy to at least entertain and see if that works for you in your situation. And, obviously you got to sift through deals to find the right one that works, but they are out there.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a good one. You can also eventually look into building more units on that property. That's a strategy that I've used to make lots of equity gains and make properties cash flow that otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah.
Where you're building an ADU on a property, building additional units. So you can, again, you're forcing that appreciation, you're forcing
Mm.
cash flow
Hmm.
growth through more creative strategies.
Right. Yeah. So say I found, I guess a promising rental, how do I go about like acquiring it? Because if it's a really, really good one, I imagine you're competing with other people who want it as well, So
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the process of actually getting it under my name, purchasing it myself, what does that process look like? Any tips you recommend on how to kind of solidify the deal and be ahead of the competition?
Yeah, of course. You definitely want to get pre-approved, pre-qualified
Mm.
first and foremost, like we already talked about. And then once you have that pre-approval letter in hand, now it's time to start analyzing deals and start making offers. That's one of the things that we love helping people with here at Real Estate Skills is understanding how to underwrite properties and then, know how to determine what offer price to go and then really just helping people get the confidence to start making offers.
Mm-hmm.
I always love to say if you're not making any offers, you're not getting any deals. So you have to get out there and, start making connections, start looking at properties and then begin to make offers on deals. We help people with our MLS offer system, in our Ultimate Investor program, get out there and start making their own offers, making calls to real estate agents who
Mm-hmm.
have properties that are listed. So if you found that perfect rental property, you can be proactive and be the first one to call.
Right.
Because if you're working with a buyer's agent, that's great. It's one of the easiest ways. It's one of the most traditional ways, but there's a lot that gets lost in translation, and sometimes they can take a lot of time, to lock up properties for you and take action. So if you want to take a more proactive approach, then, doing kind of like what we teach here, making offers and really just setting a goal, right?
Right.
Make one offer a day
Mm-hmm.
and it might get rejected, right? It might not be something that the seller is willing to accept, but we ultimately want to be shoppers, right?
Right.
We're in the buyer's seat. We want to be shoppers and we want to be making offers that make sense for us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just because a property is listed at a certain price doesn't mean it's going to sell for that price. Doesn't mean that that's actually the market value of that property.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's tons of price reductions going on right now in the marketplace because sellers, they have very high expectations, but rates have increased. So ultimately, when rates go up, property values go down. People just can't afford those properties as much as they could before. So there's a ton of price reductions happening right now. So you could start looking at properties that have just been reduced. Those are signaling motivation, and you can go in with a lower offer that works for your business model.
Mm-hmm.
So set a goal for yourself. Maybe it's one offer a week to start out. So you
Yeah.
just get in the flow of things. It's exciting sending an offer. It's exciting, signing a contract and
Yeah.
sending it and just waiting to see what happens. But eventually then you ramp up. And hey, if all of a sudden you have 3 properties under contract that work for your model that are good deals, that's where wholesaling comes in.
Yeah.
That's where you can wholesale that deal for $10, $20, $30, $50,000.
Right. Yeah.
And then now you just earn enough for another down payment.
Yeah.
So that's why we preach, hey, like send offers, underwrite deals, get in the game, be an active investor. Because when you generate deals, then you generate opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And through networking, you can find other investors who can capitalize on those if you're not in the position to do so either.
Right.
So
I'm glad you brought that up because you don't necessarily have to buy everything that comes across your plate. You can kind of be selective and wholesale something first, or wholesale because maybe this one's a little bit better. I'm going to wholesale this one instead. But having that skill is like super important then, because if you're sending an offer a day to get that right sweet spot property.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do with the rest of them if, God forbid, you get so many under contract, right? You wholesale them.
Yeah,
That's great.
It's a great problem to
Yeah.
have. A lot of
That's good.
new
Yeah.
beginner investors, they might see that as a problem. Oh my gosh, I have 5 deals under contract because you guys said send 20 offers.
Right. Yeah.
In reality, that's a great problem to have. Yeah, I would love to have that problem. I love having that problem, and that's why we start with wholesaling as a strategy, because now you can monetize those deals instead of just canceling and say, hey, I can't buy that deal. I only have enough capital to buy one property.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can actually wholesale a couple of those deals and cherry pick the best.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We say, keep the best, wholesale the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can just monetize those contracts and help you actually afford more properties.
Right.
So it's just a great way to just stay in the game, and then just get that practice in, get that muscle of making offers, because that leads to the best opportunities.
So, to circle back, before we mentioned mortgage brokers and how they can kind of map out all that money for you, who are you actually negotiating with when you purchase property? Is it somebody else? Is it the agent? And then how do you negotiate with said person?
Yeah, great question. So ultimately, you're negotiating with the seller of the property, right? So sellers of properties, you're either working directly with them and you're negotiating directly with them. They might have a price that they're looking to get for their property. A lot of sellers just aren't really aware of what their property is actually worth. They just looked at the Zestimate and they said, oh, that's what I want for my property.
Right.
So, sometimes you're working directly with them. Sometimes you're working with an agent that the seller hired to represent them, just because they don't want to have those conversations and they don't want to deal with a bunch of different buyers. So oftentimes you're working with a listing agent who's representing the seller. So you're going to just have to go through a process, right? Let's say you're making offers, you get one accepted, and you want to do as much negotiation on the front end as possible so that you get a good property under contract at a price that makes sense. Because once you do get it under contract, if you're planning on buying it, then you're going to be spending some time, some effort, and probably some money involved to complete your due diligence on the property. So you're going to want to inspect the property. You're going to probably hire a home inspector. If it's your first several deals, just to do a thorough home inspection. That might run you $400 to, potentially even $1,000 to do a home inspection and really understand what's going on with the property. You're going to spend time looking at the leases if it's a tenant occupied property. So you're going to be signing a lot of paperwork. So you want to do negotiation on the front end, but of course you can negotiate while you're under contract too. Because a lot of times you're going to find things during your due diligence period, your inspection period, that are going to change your opinion of the property. It's going to impact the value of the property. And you can use that as an opportunity to negotiate at that time as well.
Right.
So that's why it is important to, do your due diligence, during your escrow period if you can. And then, you can kind of reevaluate and reassess to make sure it's still a deal that you want to buy.
Right. Make sure everything's in order, and then, commit. And then, hopefully by all said and done, you have your first rental property under your belt as well, right?
Yeah. So a lot of things happen when you're under contract on your first rental property, and any rental property. You're going to be working with your lender. They're going to order an appraisal, like we mentioned earlier. You want to make sure that it appraises for at least what you've offered to buy it for. You're going to work with the loan officer, who's going to be asking you for every single document you can imagine, giving your personal information to this lender and making sure that you can qualify for that mortgage. So you want to just make sure you have, several contingencies in your contract to make sure you're not locked in from day one. Your inspection contingency, which allows you to inspect the property, make sure there's no huge defects that impact the value. And, basically anything you need to flesh out during your inspection, that protects you. So if you find something, you can terminate the contract and walk away, no harm, no foul, or you can negotiate and get a better price.
Right.
You also want your financing contingency in place so that if you end up not qualifying for the loan, let's just say, God forbid, you lose your job, or you have a big life-changing event that ultimately the lender says, hey, we're actually not going to give you this loan. Then now you can terminate the contract, get your earnest money deposit back with no consequences.
Right.
Also, an appraisal contingency is smart, because if the property doesn't appraise, let's say that you got caught up in a bidding war and you just offered way too much money for it, and the property doesn't appraise, then you could say, hey, whoa, now I realize that this isn't a good deal anymore, and I can now cancel the contract with no consequences if the property doesn't appraise.
Right.
So there's some conditions that you can include in that offer, which we always advise, just to protect yourself, especially as a new investor.
Yeah, seems like a lot for somebody who's new. But I mean, obviously I'm very fortunate learning from you. So I guess, recommend anybody out there, Ultimate Investor Program, rental properties is our new product as well. So, it's a lot goes into this, and a lot goes into, doing it the right way, but you've done it 1,000 times. So I'd rather learn from you than anywhere else,
Yeah. I mean, that's why what we love, here is just working with new investors. We obviously have a very detailed program which goes step by step. Contract reviews, multiple different types of contracts, going through all of this. And there's obviously our community. We get questions all the time about
Mhm.
specific contracts. All around the country. Every state uses different contracts from the Realtors Association. So I mean, we've seen it all, and we know how these different contracts relate to each other. So I mean, the cool thing about real estate, like there are so many nuances. There's so many unique properties. Like every single property is unique.
Right.
There's no one property that's exactly the same as another.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of nuances, and really just the value of a community, the value of coaches, mentorship. So yeah, it really is a pleasure and a privilege just to, work with all of our students, work with you, and,
Yeah.
just share the experiences that I've gained, all the battle scars and, the wins and the challenges, the successes, just to be able to pay it forward.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you so much again, as always. So say we have the property. Say everything goes well with negotiation. We have it. We've solidified the deal. You recommended property manager just because it's easier. Um, how do I go about finding somebody to do it? Are there just companies out there I could just be like, hey, like manage this for me, please? Or is it like individual people who do it? Like, how did you, I guess, find your first property manager?
Yeah, my first manager was associated with the brokerage that I
Hmm.
worked with. So they had a management arm at their company. So I decided to work with them just for a seamless transaction. And I've stayed with them ever since. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like one of the best management companies I've worked with. But if I didn't have that, then I would ask for referrals from investor friendly agents, from other investors who own properties in that area. A lot of investors do work with property management companies. Some of them might love them, some of them might hate them,
Hmm.
but it's just good to get referrals from people who are actually working with those management companies. You obviously can go online and look at rental listings. So you can look at active rental
Right.
listings
Yeah.
near your rental or in the same market, and then you can call those listings because there's obviously a phone number
Yeah.
associated with those listings,
Hmm.
and then that way you can get some leads, and then you can start talking to them. We have a very thorough property management questionnaire that will help, a new investor vet the property managers, ask the right questions.
Hmm.
So you can actually really get to know how capable, how
Yeah.
competent they are in managing your first investment property.
Right. Yeah.
It is a big deal. The management side of things can really make or break your investment.
Hmm.
You want to make sure it's rented for top dollar, it's being maintained, you're qualifying your tenants well, that you're not just renting it to anyone who has a pulse.
Right.
So
Hmm.
you want to make sure that your rent's going to come in because, you're getting into debt, right? You
Hmm.
have, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars of debt. So you want to make sure you're renting it to the right people. And that's what a management company will do.
Right.
So if anyone wants that property management questionnaire, just let us know in the comments as well, and we'll be happy to send that to you as well. So you're hiring the right manager and making the right decision.
Right. I mean, I know I've left properties that I was a tenant in just because the management was so bad. Like I've done that probably 3 times in my life
Yeah.
now.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I guess finding the right one is like super important. So that questionnaire, super helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you'll have to review a property management agreement, which is the official form, the official document contract that you as the landlord, you as the real estate owner, you will sign with the property management company. So it'll outline their roles and responsibilities, their fees involved. So you just want to skim through and highlight anywhere they're saying that, hey, this is where we take our fees, this is
Hmm.
how we charge. And then you want to compare apples to apples. So what's most typical with the companies I work with 5 different management companies as well. I also self-manage some of my properties. And for the most part, they charge a percentage of gross rents, like I mentioned, anywhere from 6 to 10% of the rents that they actually collect. And a lot of them charge a leasing fee.
Hmm.
So when they actually secure a lease on a property with a new tenant, they'll take anywhere from 25% to 50% of the first month's rent. Some companies try to take a full month rent plus the 8%. I just think that's a little steep. So that's all subject to negotiation as well.
Hmm.
Some management companies will also upcharge the rent repairs or just the repairs that they're managing. They might charge 15 to 20% on top of whatever you're paying. So, again, you want to try to reduce those fees as much as possible
Hmm.
and just look for any kind of junk fees. Some of them are going to want to nickel and dime you to death. So Obviously, if you have questions, you can always come to me, come to our
Yeah.
team, and then we can kind of help you make the right decision.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I want to find the right one just because it's like I want to set it and forget it type thing. The point
Hmm.
of them is to kind of take the burden off of managing it off of me. But I guess a follow up question is, have you ever had to like self manage? And was there a benefit to it, if at all, for self managing your own property?
Yeah, no, I have self-managed in the past. I've also, yeah, I still do self-manage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, I'll self-manage even today if it's a newer property. Last year I bought a brand new construction property in Nashville, and I was the first owner. It was literally not even done when I got it under contract, and I felt comfortable doing that because there was nothing it needed. I could find a tenant, they could
Mm-hmm.
move in, and the agent that I was working with just helped, with the move in for the tenants.
Right.
So, and they've been on a 2-year lease, and no issues, like very minimal hiccups or maintenance that have come
Yeah.
up. So it gets a little more challenging if you're buying a distressed property, and if
Mm-hmm.
the property has a lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of maintenance requests you have to manage. So those I would be, unless you live close to the property, I would almost always want to hire out that management.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just kind of case by case.
Yeah. If it's like a simpler situation, it's like, why not? Why would I spend money on a property manager? I could just like,
Hmm.
make a call every 6 months. Hey, the dishwasher's broken, and then that's it for another 6 months, like that's super
Yeah.
easy, right?
Yeah. And I think, how much rent are you collecting? How much does that fee amount to also
Mm-hmm.
factors in. So if you're paying, $800 to $1,000 a month in management fees because you have really high rents on a property, then, it might make sense to look into self-managing. There's some software that you can kind of help with that self-management
Mm-hmm.
side of things, because that money could just go to, you could just hire a contractor and just pay for the maintenance that comes up,
Right.
and just pay a little more for contractors that have higher quality service.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I think if you're starting out, you're buying your first rental property, I'd always recommend just hiring a manager. Then that way you can learn how they operate, learn how they do things.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my better management companies, they'll provide financial statements every single month. So I just check my inbox. I can see, which properties they're managing, how much rent they collected, what fees were involved. I see their management fee taken out, if there's any repairs that they managed, and then what's my net income.
Mm.
And then boom, I get a check, the net check just sent to my bank account.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
I can stay in the loop with things, but really, once you have the system dialed in, you have rentals, you have them managed, then it becomes very passive.
Right. Right.
So
And hopefully opening the door to multiple rentals, right?
yeah.
So, how do I go about, because the goal is not just one, the goal should be, several that will build me wealth over time, right? So, how does one go about scaling it? How long did it take from your first rental to the second one, and then the
Mhm.
third and fourth?
Yeah. So, mine snowballed, I would say relatively quick,
Oh, wow.
just
Yeah.
because I went all in on real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And, after I bought that first rental, I started wholesaling, I started getting into house flipping, and, just acquiring rentals for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say it took about 6 months to get into my second rental. And so I went and I bought a less expensive rental, because it took a little longer to save up for that down payment. So the second rental I bought was about $81,000.
Mm-hmm.
So the down payment I think was like $16,000 plus some closing costs. So it's roughly around 21,000.
Yeah.
And I think it took another, 6 to 12 months to buy the next one, or yeah, I don't recall exactly, but so started to kind of snowball. But for me in the meantime, I went in all in on real estate, and I knew that, hey, I'm going to continue buying rentals. So I'm going to start wholesaling. I'm seeing opportunities, and so I'm going to generate wholesale fees, generate assignment fees, start getting equity in house flips. And then that allowed me to just save a lot quicker and snowball this process.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, the goal is, no one's going to retire off of one rental property.
Right.
So you want to just continue to stack and repeat that process.
Yeah.
And, ultimately, when you follow this process and you start acquiring enough rentals, you're going to build equity, meaning you're going to have, the property value is going to be a lot more than what you owe on the property. So you're going to start to accumulate, six figures, multiple six figures in equity. And then you can start to either do a cash out refinance. So I know it's a big term probably. So basically, let's say I bought that first property, $120,000 loan that's worth $155,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's worth $300,000. So I can get a new loan for, let's say, $250,000, and I pay off the 120 that I owed before, and now I can pocket the 130. So I just cash out,
Right.
and I just have a new loan, and my tenant, the rents have gone up. So now I'm just basically paying off that new loan. It is a higher payment, but hopefully that rent is enough to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now I just pulled out $130,000 tax free,
Right.
because loans are not taxed because I eventually have to pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
So now I can take that $130,000 and use that as a down payment for a $500,000
Right.
property.
Yeah.
And that's all from that initial investment of $35,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's one way. That's how the wealthy continue to buy properties, because the values go up. They do cash out refinance,
Mm-hmm.
tax-free money. They go and they park that in a new property. And there's also a 1031 exchange, which is essentially a tax code which allows you to sell that property. So let's say it's worth $300,000. I sell it. So now I can take the difference, which is $180,000 tax free, and park that in a new property. And so I'm deferring the taxes on that. So I don't have to pay any taxes on the gain by doing a 1031 exchange.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of requirements you have to meet to make it a successful exchange, but this is one of the most, beautiful tax loopholes. It's not even a loophole. It's direction in the tax code,
Yeah.
which allows real estate investors to, sell, and then it encourages reinvestment in a new property.
Mm-hmm.
So they, everyone thinks it's kind of a tax break, which it kind of is, but it encourages reinvestment. So you continue to keep the capital in the markets,
Right.
and just trade up into bigger properties.
Yeah, I mean, like people tell me all the time the tax advantages and tax benefits of real estate, but kind of hearing that, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money that can be quote unquote made, because it's not taxed in the same way that other things are,
Yep.
like debt's not taxed. So yeah, I'm glad you said that for sure. So when you are like me, and you're trying to kind of get your foot in the door, what are your top tips before I kind of buy my first rental property and start real estate investing myself?
Yeah, I mean, number one is get educated. And investing is only risky if you don't know what you're doing. So the more you know, the better off you are when you're buying your first rental property. If you know how to analyze a deal, if you've seen a lot of successful deals, if you have a network of investors, if you've run the numbers on 100 properties before pulling the trigger and buying your own rental property, you're going to know with confidence that it's a good deal. So the more financial intelligence you have, the more practice you have, the more educated you are, and you have a step-by-step process to buy that first rental property, then you're going to know it's going to be a success, and you're not going to be speculating and gambling and hoping it works out. You're going to know it's going to work out. And then that's going to allow you to just continue to, reinvest and keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So number one is just get educated, read the books, invest in yourself, invest in your education, continue, consuming content, just like this one that we're producing here, and just, get your mindset right, for success.
Yeah.
So that's really number one. Number two is take action, right? Because you can't just be an information junkie and learn, and just know it's the right thing to do, but never take action.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people do that. It's like, I know it's a good thing to invest in properties. I know people are making millions. Everyone knows that properties have gone up in value significantly the past several years. But if you never take action, you're never going to be able to reap the rewards of that. So no matter what it is, right? If it's going on Redfin and looking at properties in your market, it's looking at the data in your market, just going to a networking event and meeting people who can introduce you to properties, meeting investors, walking their properties, right? Even little things like that can make a big difference.
Right.
So when you get into the habit of thinking like an investor and then doing the things that investors do, then it's inevitable that you're going to become an investor. So, eventually getting to the point where you're analyzing deals and sending offers, eventually you're going to land with great deals on your lap just because you're taking action and putting in the work.
Yeah.
And like there's really no shortcut to getting your first deal is taking action and getting out there.
Yeah. kind of the hardest step's always the first one, and so my
Mhm.
parents always tell me, but as long as you promise yourself to take just one step every day forward, then 10 miles later you're just like, wow, that didn't take very long at all, and it wasn't
Mhm.
realistically, still difficult, but not as hard as I made it up to be in my mind. Like, I feel like a lot of people like me, for sure, like, think of investing as just an impossible Olympus mountain to climb, when realistically it's just a regular mountain that I can easily climb, and everybody else in my life, can climb. And I've seen people like you who's climbed it successfully several times. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, anybody can be an investor.
Yeah.
I think that's just an important takeaway is like everybody started out as not an investor,
Yeah.
right? Like no one was born with rental properties, just
Yeah.
handed to them. So it takes time and it takes action, right? Like I wouldn't have the portfolio I have, the passive income I have, the net worth I have if I didn't take action and I didn't set time aside, from my full-time job,
Mm-hmm.
from my commitments, if I didn't dedicate myself to learning, to being a student of real estate, to absorbing as much as I could, and then ultimately getting out there and pounding the pavement. If that means, seeking mentorship, seeking apprenticeship, working for free even for somebody who's doing what you want to do and just getting around, ultimately what that end game is. And, that's ultimately going to help you get there a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then, at the end of the day too, it also ties into mindset, but like have a strong why, know why you're doing this because it is a long road, right? Like this doesn't happen overnight. Real estate is not a get rich quick scheme, right? It's a get rich for sure plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does take time. And, sometimes the most boring investments are the best investments.
Yeah.
And like rental real estate, long-term rental real estate, like it might seem boring and it's not as sexy and flashy as like Airbnb
Mm-hmm.
or, options trading or crypto or, things can just be very volatile and, people are just getting rich really quickly or so it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But, rental long-term investing is like when I look at it, I'm so thankful I took action when I did because like I look back and I'm like, wow, like I don't really know a lot of other people who are making the same returns I'm making.
Right.
Like I'm beating
Mm-hmm.
most people who are investors and like who are in the stock market
Mm-hmm.
and who are, doing this like a lot of the professional advisors, like the stock portfolio advisors and things like that. It's like I've made better returns than they have
Yeah.
in my investments. I just wish I did more of it,
Yeah.
I
And
wish
safe to
I
say, like, you kind of wish you started earlier.
yeah.
That's the only kind of regret that you have, is that I didn't start, a year or two earlier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think every real estate investor would say the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
Like there's not one that says, "Oh, I wish I have enough properties. I wish I didn't own more properties.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't start earlier."
Yeah.
Like everybody cuz time is the number one most important asset in the whole equation.
Mm-hmm.
Time in the market is more important than timing the market. So the sooner you get started, the better off you're going to be and the better your returns are going to be.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, I always tell people like act with a sense of urgency because the sooner you get in, the sooner you buy your first rental property or your next property, the better off your returns are going to be. The more time you're going to have to reap those rewards,
Mm-hmm.
the more time you have to pay off that debt, the more appreciation is going to happen. Because if you end up waiting and don't take action in, 12 months, 24 months, like 5 years, you're going to be kicking yourself because those same properties that you're looking at today are going to be worth 50%, 100% more. And there's really no sign of things slowing down, at
Right.
least for the next 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah. And, for people like in my situation, which isn't realistically on paper even that bad, but there are people far worse off. It's like, I feel like I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my why is, of course, I want to build wealth, but at the end of the day, it's for the people that I love, that I care about.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really the why that I have. And, the reason why I love talking to you is that, the empathy of that situation you've always addressed. And, with every student that you speak to, the empathy is there, because we're not only trying to make money. Obviously, money is great, but at the end of the day, we just want, to build better lives for other people. So thank you so much. Not to get super sentimental, but, every time we talk to you, it's been great. I think I'm ready to take action myself. And, I'm glad that you're there right alongside with me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Tim. I mean, this is my passion. I live and breathe it. Been dreaming of rentals, for a long time, ever since I heard about them. And so just to be able to bring it to life, and now, living with the properties I have, and the business I have, and now especially with real estate skills, is to share that message and just to help other people take action. Obviously learn about it, but then take action. Through our hands-on programs,
Mhm.
through the coaching we do, the lives we change. I mean, it is a dream come true. It's more than I could have imagined when I got started on this journey. So all it takes is that first rental property, Tim. So we're here to help, and we definitely want to make sure you follow through with this. Everyone who's watching, does take action. We have a lot of resources available to help people, find deals, analyze deals, take action on those deals, manage those deals. So, and we're going to continue to develop those and release those over time. So it's not just about wholesaling. It's not just about flipping. Rental properties are really the end game. It's about accumulating those assets so that we can live the life of our dreams, and provide for our communities, and really just break free from the rat race, and ultimately become our fullest potential at the end of the day, which
Yeah,
is what it's all about. So
definitely.
for those of you looking for more information about how to invest in real estate and getting your first rental property, just go to realestateskills.com/webinar, where we'll be happy to talk to you and help you see how we can help you implement and get in your very first rental property or your next investment. So, Tim, again, thank you so much for your time. This was a pleasure. Always happy to do it. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
If you like the content today, just go ahead and let us know in the comments. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to engage with you down in the comments. Go ahead and shoot us a like and subscribe for more content just like this.